Labor is trying to ramp up an attack on the government today over asylum seekers. Not a traditional area for Labor. They have been speaking in recent months, though, about a spike in plane arrivals and then people off those planes, they have legitimate visas, then seeking to claim asylum. Earlier I spoke to Immigration and Citizenship Minister David Coleman.
Well, actually, Tom, year on year it's down again. So it was down 12% last year, and we are seeing a reduction again when you compare the same periods year on year. I think another important point here, though, Tom, is applying is one thing. The other question is, do people get visas? And under Labor, in their last three years of office, there were about 6,800 people who got visas who applied for protection as air arrivals. Under us, it's 31% less, about 4,800. So we are seeing a declining trend in the number of applications, but more importantly, our government over the last 3 years has granted 30% less protection visas to air arrivals than Labor did in their last 3 years. And of course, Labor wants to increase the entire refugee program by 71%. So there's a very big contrast there.
I want to get to that in a moment, but just on the numbers arriving, it is a very high figure by recent statistics. We've got Abdul Rizvi, a senior immigration official, a former one, says this is a scam that's surfaced every few years, but the government's failed to act to it. What's your response to that?
Well, no, not at all, Tom. I mean, as I said, we did see a 12% reduction in the number of applications last year. The trend we're seeing so far is for a further decline this year, and the total number of approvals is significantly less under our government than it was under Labor. We obviously work on issues in terms of identifying any fraudulent activities in the system through Australian Border Force and cooperation with other governments and so on. But, you know, it's also important to remember, Tom, that people who arrive by air have arrived lawfully. They've got a visa, they've got a passport, we know who they are. They're not risking their lives at sea and endangering Australian personnel at sea in the same way that people who arrive by boat do. And, you know, under Labor we saw this humanitarian catastrophe of 1,200 people drown at sea. So they're very, very different situations. Yeah. And as I say, we've actually provided less visas to people who arrived by air than Labor did.
But just on this total number arriving, I mean, from a few years ago it was 8,000, last year 25,000. That is a huge spike, and a lot of them are staying in the country for some time, often being exploited through the labour force. That's got to be a concern, doesn't it?
Well, we've seen significant increases in arrivals and applications across the board in the immigration program. And in terms of people who are rejected when they apply for protection, you know, they've got to go. People who are rejected don't get to stay. It is unlawful for them to stay. And if they seek to stay, they are subject to removal by the Australian Border Force. And through Project Kadena, Operation Baton Run and other actions run by the ABF and others, we take action on those matters. I mean, Fair Work Ombudsman's an important part of this, and you know, Labor cut its funding by about 20%, which we reinstated and significantly increased the numbers to assist in investigating situations where people are doing the wrong thing. But again, people can apply, Tom, but the question is how many actually get to stay?
Well, on that very question, so you say this number, particularly the rate of approval, has dropped a lot. That decision is made by the department, is it not? So is this the department taking a different approach to what it did under Labor?
Well, look, we assess onshore protection claims using the appropriate rules under our various obligations. And the reality is we are approving less than Labor did, significantly less, about 30% less. People who arrive on shore are a fairly small proportion of our program, less than 10%. Now, under Labor, of course, it was much more because the system was overwhelmed by boat arrivals. And a good example of that, Tom,
but on the
there's a category called Special Humanitarian.
On the plane arrivals, sorry, you were talking about, Minister, because this is the number you say, yes, the overall number trying to arrive is higher, but the approvals are lower. Could it not be we're talking about the source country? If they're coming from China, Malaysia, they're not going to be viable for protection. If they were coming from Afghanistan before, they were. If the rules haven't changed, isn't it just about the type of person arriving?
Well, we assess them on their merits, and the reality is that we're approving significantly less than the Labor Party did, Tom. When they were in office and you had all these people arrive by boat, the Special Humanitarian Program, which used to be about 5,000 people a year for people who were offshore applying through the correct process, they slashed that to 500 people because they were so overwhelmed by boats that they weren't able to manage the system properly. Now, the vast majority of our humanitarian program is for people who are offshore, who follow the correct procedures, who follow the correct rules, and who apply. There's a small proportion who apply onshore, but a much smaller proportion than we saw under Labor when the system was completely overwhelmed by boats.
And of course, boats has been covered a lot, and so it should be, and Labor's been rightfully pilloried for that. But on this lower approval rating for those arriving by plane, isn't this just a case of, at the moment, it's the department applying those rules you mentioned? That's what they were doing under Labor's time as well. This is not a change in methodology unless there's something I'm missing there? Well,
I think, Tom, the key question is how many people have been approved, and it's significantly less under us than under the Labor Party.
You're saying that you want to take credit for approving fewer people. Why is that? Is there a change in methodology?
Well, look, we apply methodologies across the system, Tom, as is appropriate under our various international obligations and so on. But under Labor,
the same obligations
you had a situation where... let's just be clear though, Tom. So you had a situation under Labor where you had a massive increase in the number of people being given visas by boat, more than 12,000 in the last 3 years they were in office. In addition, you had more people being given a visa who arrived via plane than under us. So I think, Tom, it's basically 12,000 permanent visas for people who arrived by boat under Labor. For us, permanent visas for people who arrived by boat in the last 3 years, 0. Under Labor, about 6,800 for people who arrived by air. For us, less than 5,000. So I think those statistics are very, very clear, Tom. And Labor, I think, has committed a pretty significant own goal today in seeking to raise this issue. And of course, Tom, it all occurs in the context of the humanitarian program generally. Now, at the moment, our intake is 18,750. Now, Labor, at its national conference, its highest decision-making body, black letter law for the Labor Party, they said make it 32,000. So they want to increase the program by 71%.
Is it purely the cost that you're criticising there?
Well, the cost is massive. It's $6 billion, Tom. And, our humanitarian program is a generous program. And if you look around the world, there are very few countries around the world on a per capita basis that have a program that's similar to Australia. Canada is one. But there are very, very few others.
Frozen under Scott Morrison at the last election. And you're basically saying that 18,750 is the right number, exactly that number, and no more.
Well, we think it's an appropriate number. It's the right number. And, the question's really one for Labor, Tom. Why are they advocating a 71% increase in the refugee program? That is their policy. And they need to come out and justify and say, we, the Labor Party, believe Australian taxpayers should pay an additional $6 billion to increase the humanitarian program by 71%. Because that's their policy. All
right, Bill Shorten called it sustainable and generous, I think last time around, compassionate. Anyway, well, that might be something Labor puts up in the air again with its various reviews. What about the number of people here in Australia now who did arrive by plane that Australia has decided should go home but are evading the authorities in some way? How many people are there in that situation at the moment?
Well, there's about 25,000 people who are involved in various appeals, predominantly at the AAT and also through the courts. And then in terms of people who aren't appealing, they're required to go home. And we have significant resources through Project Kadena, through Operation Baton Run, through the Fair Work Ombudsman and through other sources to go after people who seek to exploit the system. We recently had, through one of the operations, 89 people identified as being involved in unlawful conduct in relation to the labour hire industry. Their visas were cancelled, and that process continues. So there's zero tolerance for anyone who abuses the system, Tom, and we always seek out those people. But, you know, the key point, Tom, is that under us there are significantly less people being approved.
But what's the number of those people in that situation that Australia is seeking to deport but cannot find for whatever reason? What is that number at the moment?
Well, again, Tom, we look at various activities going on through Project Kadena, through Operation Baton Run, and we identify those individuals in various cases, and we'll continue to do that. And we do it, you know, a lot better than the Labor Party did.
But shouldn't it be pretty straightforward, so they get a date by which they need to leave the country and they don't do so? Is there a ballpark figure you have for us?
Well, look, again, Tom, I think the key point is that people who don't get a visa are required to go home. If they unlawfully stay, we will pursue them. They are liable for removal. In some cases, they're placed in detention prior to removal. In some cases, they go straight to removal. But there's significant activities through Australian Border Force focused on that issue.
Right. But shouldn't you know the number? You've got all these activities focused on it in task forces. Surely there's a number there on how many are in that situation.
Well, there's been a significant number of people who have been removed under those different activities, Tom. But
not removed though. Still
certainly Well, again, Tom, we're focused on identifying those individuals and removing them. We do it very regularly. We do it a lot better than the Labor Party, who slashed the funding to this area. And we're not giving as many permanent visas to people, whether they arrive, people who arrive via air, than the Labor Party did. I mean, the Labor Party was basically saying that people could stay.
Just finally, Minister, situation a worrying one for many Kurds in the north of Syria. Is there any consideration of a special one-off acceptance of refugees from that part of the world?
Oh, well, look, Tom, I know that in terms of that issue, I know that the government will have more to say in relation to the situation in that part of the world today, and I'll leave that to other ministers to comment on.
Obviously, we had, though, under your government, a one-off extra number, 13,000 Syrians accepted from that part of the world. You've got these Kurds that helped defeat ISIS. Would that be a logical consideration, one-off visas? Well,
look, Tom, again, I'm not going to speculate on that issue. It's something that the broader issue will be commented on by the government.
Immigration Minister David Coleman, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Tom.